Welcome back, Keith Tebow at FRC Media. Thank you for joining us on this Monday afternoon. As we've mentioned, we're getting closer and closer to the election of 2020. Summer has just started, but the state primary in Massachusetts is actually on September 1st. So it's very early this year. And there are a number of contested races on the primary ballot. Chief among them, I guess, for our region and our city is who will replace Joseph Kennedy as the congressman for the 4th Congressional District. We're going to have the opportunity to speak with all of the candidates running in the race. There are 9 Democrats and 2 Republicans that'll be on the primary party ballot. And I'm pleased to be joined by one of those candidates right now. I'm pleased to be joined by Natalia Linos, who is one of the Democratic candidates for the position. Natalia, welcome and thank you for joining us here in Fall River. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Keith. I look forward to our conversation.
Let me just ask you right off the bat, for those people who do not know you, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you were interested in running for Congress.
Thanks, Keith. So I am an epidemiologist, that's a public health expert who started feeling pretty dismayed by the COVID response of the government. It started with a little bit of anxiety and frustration. I was writing pieces in the Washington Post saying that we need to pay attention to inequities, that we needed to pay attention to communities of color and to low-income workers. And then it became quite shocking and quite obvious that this government, this administration was failing people, was failing Americans in the 4th District and across the country. So I stepped into the race very late. At the end of April, I declared that I was a candidate, and in 5 days, I was able to get 1,200 signatures to get me on the ballot. I am currently the executive director of a center at Harvard for Health and Human Rights. I'm also a mom of 3 little kids. We live in Brookline. And I think that my experience, both as a public health expert, but also someone who worked at the United Nations for over a decade and at the New York City Health Department during some of the top crises that our globe has faced, including Ebola, gives me a unique expertise. So I joined the race because it felt urgent, because I am worried about COVID, but I'm also worried about Black lives. I'm worried about racism. I'm worried about our country. And so I hope to serve District 4 and the communities across the district, most importantly in Fall River, who have been left behind through my representing you in Congress.
This may be too safe to say on my part, but with your background in public health and, infectious diseases, really, what about is happening now? Is that one of your top issues as you head into the campaign and starting meeting people?
It is. So I am a social epidemiologist. That's someone who looks at health, not just as the absence of illness. It's not just about access to medical care, although that's very, very important. It's also about what our neighborhoods, how we're set up, whether we have paid family leave, whether we had paid sick leave, and how do we structure ourselves? How do we reopen safely? So right now, I'm focusing a lot about what we can do to get back to work, get back, open up, but do it in a way that doesn't hurt some members of our community. So today, as you know, in Massachusetts, Governor Baker's plan has opened up even more indoor dining, indoor massage parlors, things like that. I'm concerned that not enough measures have been put in place to protect low-income workers who, for example, might not have a car to get to work. So we really need to have buses and public transport more frequent, who may not have the financial resources for the PPE and the masks. So I really, really believe that we have to reopen in a way that protects everyone, including low-income workers and including communities of color.
One of the things, and we're going to be talking to the candidates throughout the next 4 or 5 weeks. So some of the issues may change because of just the timing of everything, but I want to focus a little bit more on COVID-19 and its impacts. First of all, how difficult has it been, even though you just got into the race in April when the pandemic was in full force? How difficult is it for you to try to get your word out without using some of the normal ways we do that, meeting people in locations?
Yeah, it's hard, Keith. I mean, I would love to be in person with you. I would love to be meeting people by, in the communities. I don't enjoy Zoom like every other person doesn't enjoy Zoom. The one benefit is that I'm able to have small group conversations. So I had a small group conversation with nurses in Fall River who are very concerned about a second wave and what that means for them. I had a conversation with students across the district who are looking for a different candidate, a candidate who has progressive values but has a skill set like mine, which is, a science background, to bring evidence to bear. So the benefit is that, some groups that may not have been able to hear my voice are able to through these collective Zooms and through these interviews. So I'm actually very grateful that you're hosting me today, because Facebook Live, Zoom is my friend right now.
Yeah, absolutely. You and all the other candidates. I want to get into a little more about health care in general, because that perennially has been an issue in the congressional campaigns, making sure that everyone has access to affordable, effective, and professional health care. What are your thoughts on that? Are you in favor of Medicare for all? And I guess, what are your general thoughts about making sure everyone remains healthy and can afford to remain healthy?
Yeah, thanks so much, Keith. And I come to this from the deep belief that health is a human right, that nobody should be dying, nobody should be going bankrupt because of bills. And this country is one of the wealthiest countries in the world. It's one of the countries that has the best doctors, the best healthcare services, the best technology, and yet we're not doing so well when we look at life expectancy, about maternal mortality, even infant mortality. Our stats do not compare to other countries that spend a lot less. So I care deeply to fix this broken system, to fix it both for the individuals who can't afford to get the care they need, for the individuals who are too scared because they're scared about the bills, and also to fix it for our country. We're spending too much and getting too little. So yes, I believe in Medicare for all. I believe that gives us the flexibility to bargain and ensure that the costs are actually reduced for everyone. I believe that families who already have a provider, are attached to that provider, should have the option to stay with that provider. So I have to find a way to ensure that any changes are not detrimentally, are not felt by the mom or the child who has a relationship with their pediatrician and doesn't want to change that. So yes, and I think that a value-driven, reality, and COVID has made it clear that it's just too dangerous for all of us not to take healthcare seriously.
When we talk about access to healthcare, a lot of it has to do with the finances of it and how it's going to be paid. But there's also some disparities in terms of different communities, those in the Black and African American community, the Latino community, that may not have access to the specific needs that they have, whether they are facing socioeconomic barriers or language barriers. How do you propose we address those?
So there's a lot that has surfaced. I mean, I'm someone who has looked a lot into structural racism and health, and I think it's important to explicitly talk about racism across many different fields and how that impacts our health and well-being. So that includes discrimination and unconscious or conscious bias in the healthcare settings. So even if you show up to the same hospital, if you're Black or if you're a white pregnant mom, you will have slightly different or radically different experiences. So that has to end. But also everything around our neighborhoods, segregated neighborhoods, segregated schools. Racism plays into the opportunities that you have to live a healthy life, whether that includes, playgrounds and outdoor space that you can, be physically active, whether there is environmental pollution, toxic waste, or air pollution because cars are there. So racial justice is part of health justice, and I'm really happy that cities across the US and states are starting to call racism a public health priority. Unless we do that, unless we actually start addressing the root causes, we are going to continue having disparities in health outcomes that are both unjust and preventable.
You speak about the racial disparities. Of course, the killing of George Floyd now 3 weeks ago, almost a month now ago, has brought a lot of other questions to the table in terms of the use of police force and the use of our police in general, in terms of making sure everyone in our community is protected. What's your view on what should be done in terms of, if anything, in terms of police reform? And we hear the phrase defund the police. What are your thoughts on that?
So I think there's a lot that can be done on police reform. Of course, the murder of George Floyd and the murders that have happened at the hands of police need to be investigated. There need to be an accounting. As a data person, as a science person, I've been calling for a national record keeping. Right now, the media, the Counted and other media initiatives are the ones who have the best data in terms of the numbers of people who have been killed or injured in police-involved, outcomes. So we do need better data. But I do think that reform is essential, and the conversation has to include where the budget should lie. So I heard an interesting phrase that was that budgeting should be a moral exercise, should be a values-based exercise. What do we value as a society, as a community, as District 4? And I think most parents like me would say education. Most women like me would say, gender equality. Most people who have worked on social justice, racial equality, they would say we need good paying jobs. We need, support to ensure that the poorest among us have a future. And then we should look at our budgets and say, are we putting our money where we say our values are? And I think the bottom line is no. I worked at the New York City Health Department, and we did joint work with the NYPD on issues around homelessness and mental health. And for every dollar that came to the New York City Health Department, $4 went to the NYPD. That distribution does not represent the accurate distribution. We need to have social workers in schools, not police. We need to have healthcare workers out there supporting communities to get through COVID, not police giving you fines for not wearing a mask. So I think, yes, police reform has to happen. It's not the only institution that has issues with racism, and that there's systemic racism in a lot of the institutions, whether it's academia or schools. So I don't want to single them out on that part, but yes, reform is needed.
Let me dovetail into something you did just bring up right now, education. COVID-19 unfortunately threw a wrench into a lot of how traditional education has been handled. We've all learned a lot in terms of how we conduct our jobs. I'm doing a lot more of these types of interviews than in person, being remote. A lot of our education was remote from March through now the end of the school year, which is just wrapping up now for many communities, or wrapped up in the past couple of weeks. How can we create less barriers to education, not only during the COVID-19 era, where some of these remote learnings may continue, but just in general in terms of improving education for all?
So Keith, I'm a huge proponent of investing in our public schools. My daughter, Amalia, is a 7-year-old. She's just graduating from Pierce here in Brookline, graduating first grade. So in general, I think investing in teachers, investing in the schools, public schools, is key. Ensuring that students of all abilities, students that have special needs, students of color, students of poor backgrounds, are able to benefit in the same way from the quality education is important. During COVID, I've been, really concerned, and I think I share this concern with every parent across the district about what's going to happen. My daughter was just learning how to read. Is she going to fall back a whole year? What's going to happen in terms of reopening? And I do think that there is a huge risk on educational outcomes actually widening, because parents who have either the wealth or the education to support their students or their kids when they're out of school will do so, and parents who don't, who have to work 2 or 3 jobs, those kids are unable to get ahead. And I'm also worried about older high school students, for example, who are taking care of their younger siblings because parents have to get to work and schools are closed. So I think there are a lot of complexities, and equity will be part of my focus in Congress as we reopen schools.
Should we also be thinking as well about expanding free college to our country? A lot of people were saying, pre-K through grade 16, getting that bachelor's degree as well. Should that be part of the equation?
I think it has to be part of the conversation. I think if it will be entirely free for everyone versus free for people who need it to be free, so low income and maybe middle income families, I think that's a separate conversation. I care deeply that our resources are targeted to those most in need and that we're actually narrowing the gap. I care deeply to think about debt. I do not believe that students should be taking on the debts that they have been taking on. I want debt relief for student loans, and I want future students to ever accumulate that much debt. But going completely free, including for high-income families, I think is not the best use of our money. And so it's a conversation of how we get there, but I agree with you that we have to be having that conversation, and we need to ensure that cost is not a barrier for some students entering and also graduating from 4-year or 2-year colleges.
One of the discussions that happens quite often with those in Congress is, how do we pay for our government? The president, had another a tax cut for everyone a couple of years ago, and right now our deficits continue to go up. How is your view in terms of taxation and making sure everyone pays their fair share?
I think taxation is important. I think we have to have a conversation around a wealth tax. I do believe that most economists agree that during COVID recovery, a deficit is what, we all agree that we have to go in that direction. We can't, austerity measures are not going to work. We're not going to be able to recover unless we introduce money into the economy. And that includes stimulus packages so that the everyday household has access to cash so that they can buy food, pay for their rent, et cetera. So I do think that in the long term, yes, taxation is the strategy. But I'm okay with us going into deficit because we are in a crisis right now, and that's how we are going to get out of it.
Now, in terms of continuing to deal with COVID-19, are you in favor of another stimulus package for people, or at the very least extending, unemployment so people who have been out of work can continue to get their funding and their supply so they can continue to live?
Yes, I am in favor. I think that the moment right now is we are in a crisis, and we are in a crisis where so many families are facing unemployment, are facing poverty, are facing difficult challenges. And the government, this is the role of the government, to step in and ensure that we are supporting every single one of those families. We've seen moves to bail out big corporations, but it's small businesses that are really suffering right now. So support to small businesses, support specifically through cash to families. The $1,200 was great, but that's not enough. Everybody knows that it's not enough. Unemployment has to continue, and we need to think about who's falling through the cracks, who was working. I heard that tip workers, for example, in restaurants, were not making enough to even get unemployment insurance right now. So let's think about who has fallen through the cracks and ensure that no family, no mom, no dad needs to worry about whether they can put food on the table or pay rent. And speaking of rent, I do think even the efforts that have been put to, on moratorias for rent, ensuring that people are not being evicted, those need to continue beyond the deadlines that were already set.
One of the other things that is coming up for members of Congress is, during the election season, a lot of candidates like to talk about domestic issues. However, foreign policy is also a part of being a member of Congress. What are your thoughts on how the country has handled its foreign affairs, and how would you approach it if elected?
So I come with a lot of international experience. I worked at the United Nations for 10 years. I've worked in many parts of the world, including the Middle East, in Lebanon, and I've been to Syria many times, and Yemen, and some of the hot spots in terms of refugee flows. I grew up in Greece. I'm an immigrant. I'm actually first generation because my parents were in the US when I was born and then moved back to Greece. So I believe that the US has always been a leader on global affairs, but with President Trump has lost that title. We pulled out of the Paris Agreement on climate change. We have been stepping back on a lot of the leadership we have shown on even HIV and LGBT rights and sexual and reproductive health with the gag rule. The US has to become a leader again, and the global community wants the US to step up. So I'm hoping that with a new administration and with a Congress that is thinking about global solidarity, that is essential, especially at a time of a global pandemic. You know, Keith, I joined this race because President Trump decided to defund the World Health Organization and step out of that. We cannot allow for COVID or any global pandemic to exist anywhere, because that puts every resident of District 4 at risk. And it's the same with climate change. We cannot solve it without it being a global solution. So I will be very much part of the conversations on foreign affairs, foreign policy, but also just global solidarity on some of our top priorities.
Are you in favor of the Green New Deal?
Oh, hugely in favor of the Green New Deal. And I think that this is an opportunity as we think about how we recover from COVID to align those two. There will be money going into, infrastructure, for example, that should go to public transportation, because public transportation, projects are costly, but they have a triple win. They're good for the environment, they're good for health, they're good for the economy. So South Coast Rail and other sort of big public transportation initiatives that should be supported. But for Fall River, obviously offshore wind is a top priority, and I'd be completely supportive, because that can create new green jobs as well as help with environmental protection. So I think there is so many win-wins, and that's why I'm for it.
As we head closer to the primary on September 1st and the general election on November 3rd, there's been a lot of conversation on how people are going to be able to vote.
Yeah.
Our presidential primary happened just before COVID-19 had a big impact in the Commonwealth. There's been a lot more talk concerning mail-in voting, allowing people to get a ballot and vote from their homes. What are your thoughts about expanding voting and allowing as many people as possible to vote in as many ways as possible?
I fully support that. I mean, that is what our democracy is about, ensuring that everybody can vote and can vote safely. I'm concerned with COVID. A number of our voters for primaries especially are over the age of 50, even over the age of 60, and they're considered a higher risk group. So I do not want to put anyone at risk. So I believe that, yes, we have to ensure that mail-in voting is part of this. Of course, if people want to vote in person, they should have that choice. I believe that this is important both for Massachusetts, the primary, as well as the November election, as well as the presidential election. We have to believe that democracy is more important, and the more ways that people can vote, the more support they can have to register to vote and to get out to vote, the better for all of us.
As we head closer to the primary, in congressional elections for quite a while now, there's been talk of the partisanship of both parties in Washington. People feel that things aren't getting done because there's more talking and squabbling than action. As one member of 435 in the House, how can you ensure that there's more discussion, more dialogue, and hopefully more partisanship in Washington?
So my approach has always been lead with your values and the outcome. So that's how I talk to you about, healthcare and health being a human right. What are our shared values? What do we want the future to look like? I think when you start with the outcome and then you're open to listening and to using evidence and data to figure out the path, you're more likely to come up with either new ideas that nobody has thought about, or to break through some issues that have been so politicized. So I'm entering as a scientist on a platform that says I will bring evidence to bear, but I will also have equity as the guiding force. And I think that will resonate with a lot of different groups. So my experience at the United Nations has been negotiating with parties that don't usually see eye to eye. That includes, China and the U.S. or Iran and the Holy See. There have always been conversations, and I have been part of conversations and behind the scenes, with groups that really do not see eye to eye on a lot of issues. But when you frame it, the problem as, what is the final outcome that we all share and we all want? There are ways to get there. Again, there are 11 scientists in Congress right now. That is dangerous at a time of a global pandemic. I want to be the 12th, but it's not just because of COVID. I think my science background will also make me more credible on other issues, from climate change to economic policy, because I'm a numbers person.
Yeah. One of the interesting aspects of this race as we head to the September 1st primary is of the 9 candidates that are running on the Democratic for the Democratic nomination, 6 of you, and you're one of them, I believe, live in Brookline, 2 live in Newton, and the ninth lives in Wellesley, all in the northern tier suburbs of Boston. Um, People in Fall River may feel a disconnect from that community up in the northern part of the district. How can you assuage those fears of being disconnected as a congresswoman from the northern part of the district, where we've seen our past 2 congressmen, Congressman Frank from Newton, Congressman Kennedy, of course, the same area, Brookline. How can you bridge that disconnect here in Fall River?
Yeah, and you're right to ask. And, as someone who hasn't been in politics, I'm not someone who has been in the local city council or a town official. It's been actually disheartening to see how expensive campaigns are. And the reason why you're only seeing candidates from this northern part is because you either have to be independently wealthy or have very strong networks with very wealthy people. It's very hard for someone without either of those to step up. So fundamentally, I think our system is broken. There should be more candidates for Fall River. Now, on your question about how I will represent Fall River, I believe deeply that my entire 15 to 20 years of my career experience has been always focused on inequities and focused on those who have been left behind. I did that work at the UN, working in some of the poorest countries of the world. I did that work in New York City, focusing on parts of New York City that were poor, but also forgotten in some ways because of, had higher rates of opioid overdoses, had higher rates of maternal mortality. And I'm doing that through my work at Harvard. My center is on health and human rights, and I focus, my focus has always been on those left behind. So Fall River is the part of the district that I want to be known to have served the best in Congress, and to ensure that they are lifted, and that we do not have these stark inequities within our district.
Yeah. As we have about a minute or so left, I'm going to give you the opportunity to speak directly to the voters of Fall River as we head to the primary. And how can people find out more information about your campaign?
So I would love for you to check out my website. It's Natalia for Congress, Natalia for Congress.com. I would love for you to volunteer. I currently have 200 really energetic volunteers. This is a movement. I have a decade, 2 decades of experience in global health, on racial justice and health. And I really believe that the health of District 4, the future of District 4, relies on people like me coming in from the outside and saying, we need a better future. We need to rewrite the rules so that everyone can benefit. COVID is a tragedy. It's why I'm stepping in. But COVID is also the opportunity to build back better. And I want to be part of that solution. And I hope you will vote for me so that I can serve you better.
Natalia Linos, Democrat for the 4th Congressional District in Massachusetts. Thank you for joining us and speaking to the people in Fall River, and all the best. And hopefully we'll talk again soon. Thank you.
I hope so too.
I want to thank you for joining us as well, as we'll be talking with the candidates of the 4th Congressional District over the next few weeks and heading into the September 1st primary. I'm Keith Tebow. Thank you for joining me today, and have a great rest of your Monday.